Our next task is to hook up the delete button. This will be pretty quick since we've already got our Firebase reference to this particular to-do. Let's start by adding an event handler attached to our delete button. We'll do a little bit of formatting and say on click this dot handle delete click, and then we'll add our handler handle delete click, and here's our function. So believe it or not, deleting this with Firebase is going to be ridiculously easy. We've already created our Firebase reference up in component will mount. So to delete this particular node, keep in mind that we're referencing a particular to-do here because we added it in our key. All we have to do is say this.fb.remove. Okay, let's save this, wait for the reload, and now we should be able to just click this and immediately see this to-do go away. There's our delete, and we can verify over on our Firebase dashboard that it is in fact gone. Let's add one more to-do, and get one more to-do on here so we have at least one on the page. So the next thing I want to do, if you'll notice that when we click in here, it is an editable field. When we type, nothing happens because we haven't set this up as a controlled component yet. Let's add in another feature here and say that the user should be able to update their text, but it will not save until they click a new button that says save over on the right. That means that we're going to need to know when the user has updated their text and respond appropriately. To keep track of when the user has updated their text, we'll add another flag in getInitialState. We'll call it text changed and default it to false. Next, on our text input, we'll add our event handler for detecting when the user is trying to edit the text. We'll say on change this.handle text change. And then we'll add our event handler handle text change, and don't forget our comma. This is going to take a pretty familiar format here. We'll have our event, and we'll say this.setState, and we're going to update our text. So text is event.target.value. And then the next thing is we want to, whenever the user changes their text, that means that the text has been edited. So we'll flip the flag that we just created, the text change flag, from false to true. So we'll say text changed is true. Okay, so remember, when the goal here is whenever the user edits their text, they're going to see a button that pops up that says save. And we're going to do one. I'm going to throw in just another requirement here just to show how easy it is to do. We'll also give them the ability to undo the change. So if they want, they can undo the change that they made to the edit. So let's start by adding in our two buttons. We want our two additional buttons that are going to show up to be next to this button, but it would be kind of ugly if we stuffed in a whole bunch more code in here. So what we'll do is we'll pull out a small function that's going to create JSX for the two buttons that we're going to add, which is save and undo. So we'll do changes buttons, and then we will return from here an array, bear with me for a second, which has button class name, button default, and we'll say this one is save, and then we're going to copy paste this entire button, paste it immediately underneath, and this will be our undo. Next, we're going to set this up so that we only show these buttons whenever the state, this dot state dot text changed is true, right? So we'll say this dot changes buttons. Whenever this function is called, it'll return these two buttons right here. But if our text changed is false, then we don't want to show these two buttons. So all we have to do is say, if not this dot state dot text changed, return just null. And then we'll turn this into an else statement and move this return block into it. Okay, so this is a pretty common pattern that you'll see in React. Sometimes our render function starts to get kind of long and kind of hard to reason about. So to break up the logic inside of render, we might pull some of that logic out to separate functions and then just call that function from inside our render method. So this is some pretty easy logic to follow. If whenever our render function is called, it's going to call changes buttons. If the user has not changed the text, we'll return null. When there's a null value inside of our render, inside of our JSX, it just means please don't render anything here, ignore this. But if we return an array of components, we instead will render these two buttons right here. So let's save this and give it a shot. Looks like we have an error in our JSX. Let's investigate. The error message itself says that our component right here, our list of components, must be wrapped inside of a single element. So we're going to, instead of returning an array, return a span, like so. We'll save, and we don't get an error. Terrific. And now let's click in here. You'll see that our two new buttons aren't visible anywhere, but we'll start editing our text, and sure enough, we get our two additional buttons. Nice. So in the next section, we're going to implement the functionality behind these two buttons.